The last shift of the night at La Tavola, a small Italian restaurant tucked in the heart of downtown Chicago, had finally ended, leaving behind the mingling scent of roasted garlic and red wine that clung stubbornly to my uniform. My feet ached inside the worn black shoes I'd bought from a discount store, and a dull pain pulsed through my lower back after hours of bending, balancing trays, and smiling at customers who rarely looked me in the eye. 3 consecutive double shifts had carved dark shadows beneath my eyes. No concealer could hide them now. Emily, table 10 needs clearing. Marco, the floor manager, didn't bother to look up from his phone. And get table 6 ready. Mr. Julian Moretti will be here in 20 minutes. His table must be perfect. The mention of that name tightened something deep inside my stomach. Julian Moretti, Chicago's invisible crown, a man who owned half the city's businesses but never spoke about how he'd built his empire. I'd worked at La Tavola for 6 months, and I'd seen him every Thursday night without fail. He always came with 2 or 3 men in tailored suits, spoke quietly, never laughed unless he did first. I gathered the plates from table 10, shivering as a steak knife slipped and clattered against the floor. My hands were trembling again. The anti-anxiety pills were still sitting on my kitchen counter at home. Rent had to come first this month. Only 1 more week until payday. 1 more week of instant noodles and tap water. Sorry, I muttered to no one in particular, but no one cared enough to hear. The restaurant changed when Julian arrived. The air shifted, voices softened, movements grew measured, and even the hum of conversation seemed to hold its breath. I had been lucky to avoid serving him so far, but Grace had called in sick tonight, and Marco didn't give me a choice. He mentioned the size of the tip with a careless shrug, as if to say, "Don't argue, just don't screw it up." I was straightening the last fork when the front doors opened, and a cool autumn draft swept in, carrying the faint trace of expensive cologne and something sharper danger, maybe. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. The room fell silent. Laughter and forks froze midair as he entered with 2 bodyguards in black suits. One scanned the room with a slow, deliberate glance, gave a nod, and only then did Julian step fully inside. He moved with the effortless confidence of a man who had never been denied anything, never worried about bills, never feared walking home alone at night. The charcoal suit fit his shoulders and narrow waist perfectly. Its price could easily match 6 months of my salary. At 46, he looked younger than the legend surrounding his name suggested. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes so deep they seemed almost black when the light hit them. I lowered my gaze, pretending to adjust a napkin already perfectly folded, while my heart thudded wildly, my mouth gone dry. 3 tables to handle tonight, one of them his. I could do this. I'd survived worse. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti." Marco's voice rang out, polished and formal, the tone reserved for royalty. "Your usual table is ready." I slipped back into the kitchen, pressing my spine against the cool tile wall, drawing a long breath. Through the round window in the swinging door, I watched Julian take his seat facing the entrance. 1 guard sat across from him, the other stationed near the bar, scanning every face. "Emily, you okay?" Grace appeared beside me with a tray of appetizers. "You've got table 12 tonight?" "No," I whispered, forcing a smile. "Just getting my bearings." Her eyes widened. "First time with the boss, huh? Don't worry, he doesn't bite. At least not in public." Heat rushed to my cheeks. I busied myself refilling the water jug, adding lemon slices just to keep my hands from shaking. "Any tips?" Grace grinned. "Be invisible until he needs you. Don't look him in the eye unless he speaks first. And whatever you do, don't spill anything on that suit." My only weapon was the water pitcher. I approached his table, the glass clinking softly as my hands betrayed me. "Good evening, sir. My name is Emily. I'll be taking care of you tonight." My own voice sounded foreign, too high, too rough. He didn't answer right away, and when I dared to glance up, his eyes locked onto mine, stripping away every pretense, every layer of calm I'd built to survive. It felt as if he could see through the uniform, into the weary fragments I'd hidden for years. For a heartbeat, the air between us changed, charged with something neither of us could name. Maybe recognition, maybe danger, maybe both. And though I was certain we had never met before, some part of me felt that he already knew exactly who I was. If you're still listening now, perhaps you can feel it too, that fragile line between fear and fascination beating inside Emily's chest, the quiet pull in Julian's gaze. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video so we can bring you more stories like this every day. I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Leave your city or country in the comments below, so we can see just how far Emily and Julian's story has traveled across the world. Emily stepped away from the table, retreating quickly into the kitchen, her heart still pounding from that single glance. As she wiped trays and arranged glasses, whispers floated around her rumors about the powerful man seated outside. Julian Moretti wasn't just wealthy. He was the quiet architect of half the district's rhythm, a man whose influence reached places no one dared name. People said half the city's foundations were somehow tied to his companies, his properties, his name, but no one could ever explain how he'd built it all. Former employees whispered that Julian noticed everything, the smallest twitch, the slightest hesitation, and that anyone foolish enough to disrespect him soon regretted it in ways best left unspoken. Emily remembered the first time she'd seen him months ago, standing at a distance as he dined with men in black suits, his sharp eyes scanning the room as though every movement were a chess piece under his command. Even when he smiled, it carried weight, a quiet assertion of dominance that made everyone lower their voices. Her heart clenched now, a blend of fear and something else she didn't want to name. How could one man command such presence, such silence? Grace's warning echoed in her head. Any wrong signal, and Julian would notice and respond in his own way. That thought made Emily's pulse quicken. Every move, every word might already be under his gaze. As she polished wine glasses, she told herself to stay cautious, to blend into the background, to survive the night unnoticed. Yet curiosity gnawed at her. Who was Julian Moretti? Really? How could one man hold an entire city in quiet submission? Fear and fascination intertwined until she couldn't tell one from the other. Passing through the aisle again, she caught sight of him from afar, the straight back, the stillness, the way his eyes swept across the room and lingered only briefly where they meant to. A shiver ran down her spine, her pulse fluttering as she drew a deep breath and forced herself to keep moving, each step along that narrow path between danger and desire. The kitchen seemed to move in rhythm with her breath, the soft clink of glass, the steady drip of water, and beneath it all, the silent pressure of Julian's unseen gaze stretching across the restaurant. Emily knew, without needing to be told, that the night ahead would not be like any night before, and from this moment on, every look, every heartbeat would carry the weight of a man she barely knew, but could no longer ignore. When Marco tapped my shoulder and said, in a tone far more serious than usual, that Mr. Moretti's table was ready, my heart jolted so hard it felt as if it might break free from my chest. I drew in a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my hands still trembled as I lifted the tray of water. Each step across the wooden floor seemed amplified, echoing through me until my pulse raced in time with the sound. Emily, this is both an opportunity and a trap, I told myself. As I approached Julian's table, the light from the chandelier swept over the sleek charcoal suit that molded perfectly to his frame, outlining every sharp line with precision that felt almost menacing. He lifted his head, and those dark, bottomless eyes caught mine, pulling in the light, studying every flicker of motion I made. A wave of fear and anticipation rippled through me, making me want to lower my gaze, but I knew even that small act might draw his attention further. I set the pitcher down. The rim of the glass clinked softly from my unsteady grip, and I managed a hoarse greeting. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti. I'll be serving you tonight." Julian didn't respond right away. His gaze held mine in place, assessing, dissecting, as if he could read the silent chaos underneath my calm exterior, the exhaustion, the guarded fragments of me I tried so hard to hide. I quickly looked down, pretending to adjust a perfectly folded napkin, but I knew it was useless. Nothing could mask the emotions rising beneath my skin. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft tick of the small clock at the front desk and the distant murmurs of the other staff. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, smooth, commanding without effort, as he told his bodyguard to bring over the bottle of wine he'd requested earlier, his eyes never once leaving me. A chill traced my spine, an invisible current of electricity that told me he wasn't merely observing. He was reading me, my nerves, my fear, every shallow breath I took. The trembling in my hands eased slightly as I served the first appetizer, but my heartbeat refused to calm. A single, persistent question pulsed through my mind. How could a man I had never met make me feel both terrified and drawn to him at the same time? I stepped back, retreating to the wall near the kitchen, breathing deeply, trying to regain control. Yet my eyes, as if disobedient, kept finding him again. I knew, with unsettling certainty, that from this moment on, the night would become a test, not just of my work, but of my composure, my ability to stand before a man whose power was as magnetic as it was dangerous. The tension in the room grew thicker, heavy enough to taste, and the restaurant seemed to move in quiet deference, every glance, intentional or not, drifting toward Julian's table. And I knew, standing there with the faint scent of wine and candle wax in the air, that from this second forward, every step I took, every gesture, every fleeting look would be noticed, studied, and weighed by him. The thought made me want to flee, and yet I couldn't make myself look away. I moved closer to Julian's table, my hands still trembling around the tray of water, each step feeling like walking a tightrope stretched over silence. Every heartbeat warned that even the smallest mistake could draw his attention in ways I wasn't ready for. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti. Tonight's appetizer is shrimp salad with lemon dressing, and the main course is mushroom risotto," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though the breathlessness threaded through each word betrayed me. Julian didn't answer right away. His eyes seemed to pierce through the layers of the room and through me until I felt completely exposed. I lowered my head, adjusting the napkin once more, trying to anchor myself in the routine of my work, but his gaze followed, making it impossible to breathe freely. As I turned to return to the kitchen for water, something caught my eye, a small, cream-colored envelope resting beside his wine glass. My pulse spiked as I leaned closer and realized it was his business card, the back marked with neat, deliberate handwriting, his personal phone number. For a moment, I stood frozen, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Why would a man as powerful and well-known as Julian Moretti leave his card for me, a waitress who had never served him before? The tremor returned to my hands as I bent down to pick up the tray, my eyes lowered but, almost against my will, searching for him again. He lifted his wine glass, took a slow sip, and his gaze never left me. It wasn't just watching, it was dissecting, as though every thought and every flicker of emotion in me was being quietly read aloud. "Emily, stay calm," I told myself. "Don't let him see the fear." But my heartbeat and my breathing betrayed me, revealing the tension I couldn't hide. I walked between the tables, each step heavier than the last, aware of my coworkers' cautious glances. None of them would intervene. Julian wasn't just another wealthy guest. He was a man whose name carried weight, whose shadow stretched far beyond this restaurant. I set each dish before him, my hands shaking, struggling to maintain composure. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, smooth, and commanding. "The appetizer sounds perfect. Bring the main the way I usually like it." I nodded quickly, relief and anxiety colliding as I turned away. He didn't need to look at me again. His presence was already etched into my thoughts, his eyes burned into memory. As I lifted the tray, my fingers brushed the edge of the business card, the thick paper grounding me in the reality of what had just happened. From this moment, I was under his gaze, a man both dangerous and magnetic, whose world existed beyond mine, yet somehow had drawn me in. That fleeting moment told me I was standing at the threshold of something unfamiliar, a world where every movement, every glance held meaning. Whether I wanted it or not, I had become part of a silent game of power and control that Julian Moretti had begun. Each time I returned to pour water or clear a plate, his eyes found me again, sharp and unrelenting, pulling me closer in a way I couldn't understand. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to remain professional, suppressing the swirl of nerves, confusion, and the strange spark of curiosity that had begun to take root. I told myself I had to learn to master my composure beneath the gaze of a man who could shift the air around him without saying a word. The pauses between our words, the silence between glances, built a tension that felt almost tangible, a quiet, suffocating rhythm that told me this was no ordinary shift. It was a test of poise, of instinct, and of courage. And as the weight of that card pressed against my palm, I understood that Julian Moretti had noticed me in a way no one ever had before, and from that moment on, nothing about my life would ever be ordinary again. When I left the restaurant, exhaustion clung to my body like a second skin, but beneath it pulsed a strange unease that kept me from breathing freely. A light rain fell over Chicago, turning the streets into mirrors for the blurred gold of the streetlights. I clutched my handbag close and walked quickly but carefully, eyes flicking to every shadow. As I reached the corner near my small rented apartment, I saw it a sleek black car idling quietly by the curb, engine low, headlights off. My heart lurched violently. No one knew my schedule. No one but me and Julian Moretti. I stopped, drawing in a shaky breath, forcing myself to stay calm and watch from a distance. A man in a suit stood beside the car, one hand resting on a leather briefcase, his gaze sweeping the street with practiced precision. The realization came slow but cold. This wasn't coincidence. Emily, stay calm, I told myself. Don't react. But the prickling awareness of being watched made every nerve in my body stand on edge. I turned down another street, walking at a measured pace. But the man adjusted his steps to match mine, keeping just enough distance to make pursuit seem invisible. That was when I understood he wasn't an amateur. He was trained to follow without being seen. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. My fingers closed around my keys, sharp edges pressing into my palm, and for a moment the memory of Jason, my violent ex, flashed back like a blade. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but fear and caution battled inside me, and I knew that panic would only make me vulnerable. I stopped again, scanning my surroundings. No footsteps, no voices, only the hum of rain and the steady rhythm of my breath. The car hadn't moved. The figure stood still, patient, as if waiting for my next decision. Emily, I told myself, this isn't random. Julian had warned me once that he knew every detail that mattered. But I had never imagined that his reach extended this far, that his presence could follow me into the rain, invisible yet unmistakably there. Fear twisted into something else, something I didn't want to name curiosity. Why me? What did he want? Gathering every ounce of composure I had left, I walked quickly toward my apartment, my steps echoing against the wet pavement. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, but my eyes kept darting to the window. The car remained, motionless, the man's silhouette still visible under the streetlight. I shut the door behind me and leaned back against it, exhaling hard. My pulse still hammered, my chest tight with something more than fear. The presence of that car, that man, wasn't just a threat, it was a message. Julian Moretti was watching, maybe protecting, maybe warning. I didn't know which frightened me more, the danger of his world pressing closer into mine, or the realization that part of me didn't want to look away. From that moment on, I understood. My life would no longer be ordinary, and safety was now a fragile illusion I could no longer trust. When I closed the apartment door behind me, I leaned against the wall, my heart still racing, my hands still trembling. Through the narrow slit of the window, I saw that the black car was gone, yet the feeling of being watched lingered, clinging to me like an invisible shadow that followed every thought. Emily, I told myself, I need to understand this. What kind of concern is Julian Moretti showing me? Is it genuine protection, or a subtle form of intimidation that makes me want to trust him even as tension coils tight inside me? The image of his eyes as I served him earlier still burned in my mind, both terrifying and magnetic, awakening a strange curiosity I couldn't explain. I set my bag down, sank to the floor, holding a stack of papers in my lap, and wondered if that car and the man watching me were signs of protection or silent warnings I was meant to obey. Memories of Jason rushed back, the violence, the careful steps I'd learned to take, the fear I buried deep, and they tangled with my thoughts, leaving me torn between feeling shielded and stripped of control. I looked around the tiny apartment that had once felt like my only refuge, but now even its walls seemed fragile under the weight of a man's influence I didn't yet understand. Everything I once believed was safe had become uncertain, and I realized I was standing on a knife's edge between safety and surrender. I wondered if Julian's actions came from genuine concern, or from a need to prove power, his way of saying that even outside the restaurant, I was still within his reach. The thought frightened me, yet there was something else, something unspoken, that drew me closer instead of pushing me away. Emily, I whispered to myself, I can't run, but I can't give in either. There are still too many secrets inside me, too many wounds that haven't healed, and one wrong step could turn curiosity into danger. I closed my eyes, drew a long breath, and tried to calm the trembling in my chest, but the images kept returning: the black car, Julian's eyes, that quiet, commanding presence that seemed to follow even in absence. They reminded me that from now on, every choice would have to be deliberate, every action weighed carefully. Was his attention genuine, or was it a test? I didn't know. All I knew was that I was caught in something I hadn't chosen, a quiet game where power and protection intertwined, and that every move I made could shift its balance. In that silent battle between fear, fascination, and the pull of something dangerously close to surrender, I understood. From the moment Julian Moretti noticed me, my ordinary life had ended. Now, I had to learn how to stand firm in a world that felt both threatening and intoxicating, a world ruled not by safety, but by him. As the elevator doors slid open, I stepped into the dim hallway of my apartment building, my fingers gripping my bag tightly, heart still pounding from a day that refused to end. The memory of Julian's eyes, of the black car waiting in the rain, still clung to my mind like smoke. I was halfway down the corridor when a shadow moved too sudden, too close. Before I could react, a man lunged from behind the corner, his hand clamping down on my arm, slamming me against the wall. The sharp, sour smell of cheap liquor filled my lungs, and for an instant, my heart simply stopped. "Come with me," he hissed, his voice rough and threatening, his eyes carrying that same cruel gleam I'd seen before in Jason, my violent ex. The panic came hard and fast, memories flooding back. The shouting, the bruises, the nights spent holding my breath, waiting for silence. I struggled, twisting against his grip, but he was too strong. My mind blurred. My legs trembled so violently I could barely stand. "Emily, stay calm," I begged myself. "Look for a way out." But the hall was empty, the walls pressing in, every escape blocked by his weight and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, out of the shadows, another hand appeared, large, sure, and fast. It seized the man's wrist and twisted sharply. The drunk stumbled, hit the floor hard, his groan echoing against the concrete walls. My breath caught as I turned and saw him, one of Julian's men. I recognized the controlled strength in his movements, the dark suit, the cold precision, the same man who had stood by the black car outside my building. "Are you all right, Miss Emily?" His voice was deep and steady, calm in a way that only power could be. Something in his presence frightened me, yet somehow I felt safe, sheltered, even. I couldn't speak, only stared at the man sprawled on the floor, realizing Julian hadn't just been watching. He had been anticipating protecting me in silence, yet with absolute control. The bodyguard picked up my bag, his grip firm around my shoulder as he guided me toward the car waiting at the curb. His eyes scanned every corner of the street, sharp and alert, as though nothing escaped his awareness. When he opened the car door, my heart was still hammering as I slid into the leather seat, and there he was, Julian, sitting in the dim light, calm, composed, eyes like black glass that reflected everything and revealed nothing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. A single nod told me everything. I was safe now, but only because he allowed it. The car began to move, gliding through the wet Chicago streets. The rain tapped softly against the windows, the city lights streaking across the glass like liquid gold. I sat frozen, caught between terror and relief, unable to tell which emotion ruled me. Julian's hand rested lightly over mine, a gesture both tender and possessive, sending a shiver through my chest. In that quiet touch lay his message. This was protection, but it was also power. I wasn't just being rescued, I was being claimed. The world outside blurred, fading into darkness, and I realized that my life had just crossed an invisible line. From this moment on, I no longer belonged entirely to myself. I had stepped into Julian Moretti's world, a place where safety and danger walked side by side, where every act of kindness came with a price, and where control was the only language that mattered. As the engine hummed and the rain whispered against the glass, I felt it deep in my bones. Every choice I made from now on would have consequences. Julian was not merely my protector. He was the one who decided where safety ended and peril began. And though fear gripped me, so did fascination, because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't look away from the man who had just rewritten the boundaries of my life. The sedan stopped in front of Julian's estate, a grand, imposing mansion nestled within a quiet Chicago neighborhood where tall iron gates and towering trees formed a wall of elegance and secrecy. I stepped out, my legs still trembling from the earlier attack, my body caught between relief and disbelief. 2 guards stood by the entrance, their eyes sharp and unyielding, scanning every shadow as though danger could appear at any second. Julian walked behind me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture that was both protective and commanding, and in that simple touch, I understood. I was stepping into a world where everything was under his control, and from this moment on, my freedom would be delicately, almost imperceptibly, restrained. The heavy doors opened, spilling warm light into the night. The interior was breathtaking. Dark wood-paneled walls, high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers, the air carrying the faint scent of cedar, and something more elusive, power. I followed him through the vast foyer, my footsteps soft on the marble floor, each one echoing like a quiet reminder that this was no longer the small apartment I called home. This was somewhere foreign, a place where safety and captivity shared the same walls. An elevator carried us upward, the hum of its motion deep and constant. I could feel his presence beside me, steady, controlled, impenetrable. When the doors opened, I stepped into a room bathed in soft golden light. A large bed draped in silk linens dominated the space, flanked by elegant furniture and the understated luxury of someone who never needed to prove wealth. I inhaled deeply, trying to ground myself, but the tremors in my hands refused to fade, and my heartbeat still thundered against my ribs. Was this safety, I wondered, or a gilded cage where every movement would be seen, every thought silently anticipated by Julian Moretti? Emily, I told myself. I had never felt protection and oppression so intertwined, safe from the outside world, yet quietly confined within it. A young woman entered, poised, efficient, her expression neutral yet respectful. She carried a tray of food and a folded silk nightgown, setting them carefully on the bedside table before retreating with a polite nod. Her composure told me everything. This house ran on discipline, precision, and Julian's invisible authority. I picked up the tray, my stomach twisting with unease. Was this care or control dressed in generosity? Each act of kindness from him seemed to carry its own gravity, its own consequence. As I moved about the room, I tested the windows, the locks, and found thick, unyielding glass bulletproof. Safety, yes, but safety with boundaries. Every exit accounted for, every corner known. I realized then that in Julian's world, protection came at the cost of freedom. And freedom, in his presence, was a privilege, not a right. The contradiction tore through me. I wanted to run, to reclaim something of my old self, but for the first time in years, I also felt undeniably safe. When Julian entered, his silhouette filled the doorway, the quiet strength in his stance impossible to ignore. His gaze met mine, cold, precise, but beneath it, a faint flicker of warmth that unsettled me even more. He didn't need words, his presence spoke enough. He stepped closer, his hand resting gently over mine again, a silent reminder that from this moment forward, he decided who was safe and who wasn't. In that breath, I understood with chilling clarity. I was standing before a man who could protect or destroy with equal ease, and I had been brought into his world, a place of order, secrecy, and absolute control. As the door closed softly behind him, I realized I would have to learn how to survive in this strange new balance between safety and surrender, between comfort and captivity. Because in Julian Moretti's world, protection was never just about kindness, it was about possession. And I was no longer just Emily, the waitress from La Tavola. I was someone under his watch, part of his domain, living within a fortress where even safety could feel like a beautiful form of confinement. When Julian entered the room, his gaze swept across the space with quiet precision before settling on me, sitting at the edge of the bed with my knees drawn close, trying to steady my breathing. The room seemed to shrink as he approached, every step deliberate, measured. He took the chair near me, close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from him, yet far enough to remind me that every movement I made was being watched. "Emily," he said softly, his voice deep and calm but carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Are you all right?" I drew a shaky breath, forcing composure I didn't feel, my voice trembling as I managed to say I was fine. But my eyes betrayed me, nerves flickering in every glance. Julian leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on his knees, his eyes fixed on me, watching every subtle gesture, every breath. His concern carried the same edge as his authority, making me feel both safe and quietly cornered. "Don't worry," he said, his tone soothing yet deliberate. "Everything you need is here. No one will harm you while you're under my roof." I looked around the locked doors, the reinforced windows, and the paradox of it struck me. Safety that felt like confinement. The realization pressed down on my chest, and I couldn't find words to answer. Julian rose from his chair, closing the distance between us just enough for his presence to fill the air. "You have the right to rest, to eat, to feel secure," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "But I need you to understand you're in my world now. Here, nothing happens without control." My throat tightened. The words were both comforting and suffocating. I nodded faintly, unsure whether I was grateful or frightened. Julian's lips curved into a faint smile, gentle, almost kind, but beneath it lay something sharper. "I don't want to force your trust," he said quietly, "but I won't let anyone touch you either. From this moment on, you must understand safety and freedom do not always walk hand in hand." I lowered my head, feeling the pulse in my neck hammering, aware of his eyes on me, steady and unreadable. In that charged silence, I realized the truth settling deep in my bones. I had crossed into something far more complicated than protection. I was now caught in Julian's world, a world where care came with control, where trust was both a gift and a cage. And as his shadow lingered over me, I knew every choice I made from now on would have to balance on that delicate line between the comfort of safety and the cost of surrender. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on the floor, my heart racing as Julian stood nearby, his hands resting lightly on the armrest of the chair, his gaze steady and unbroken. I knew then there was no more use in hiding. "Emily," I told myself, "it's time to face the memories you've been burying for years." I took a shaky breath, my fingers trembling as I exhaled. "Ashley," I began, my voice fragile, fading. "She was my best friend in college. She died in an accident I can't forget." The words hung heavy in the room. Julian leaned forward slightly, his expression sharp but calm, waiting, never interrupting. The stillness around him felt both unnerving and strangely safe. I told him about that night, Jason's anger, the alcohol, the violence, and how Ashley had tried to save me. The chaos, the shouting, the crash. How she'd fallen from the balcony before I could reach her. My throat tightened, the guilt and fear of that night wrapping around me like cold wire. "She died because she tried to help me," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. Julian didn't move, didn't judge. His silence was steady, grounding. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a fragile waitress, but as someone broken by loss and survival. When I mentioned the letter Jason had forced me to write, a confession twisted into blackmail, Julian's expression changed, his eyes darkening with quiet, contained fury. My hands shook as I explained how Jason had kept that letter for years, using it to control me, demanding money every month to keep his silence. "Even after I left him," I said, my voice trembling, "I could never stop being afraid." Julian reached out then, his hand resting lightly over mine. The gesture was calm but carried a weight I couldn't ignore, a silent vow that things would never be the same again. "Jason," he said slowly, his tone low and deliberate, "will never have power over you again. Men like him lose everything when they think they're untouchable. From now on, they will answer for what they've done." His voice was both comfort and command. I looked down at our hands, the warmth of his skin seeping into my cold fingers, torn between relief and unease. His protection felt absolute, so absolute it frightened me. I spoke about the past 3 years, the fear, the sleepless nights, the quiet desperation of paying to keep my own life intact, and Julian listened without interruption, his presence heavy but unwavering. No pity, no shock. Only a silent understanding that told me he already knew how to turn fear into order. When I finished, he sat back, scanning the room as if measuring its silence. Then, after a long pause, his voice came low but final. "From this moment on," he said, "every move Jason makes will be watched. Every threat will be handled. You won't have to deal with him again, ever." His words settled over me like a shroud, comforting and suffocating all at once. The fear that had ruled my life was suddenly replaced by a different kind of power, one that didn't ask for my permission. Julian's world was precise, calculated, absolute, and now I was inside it. I felt both safe and trapped, relieved yet uneasy, aware that every choice I made from this point forward would exist within the boundaries he had drawn. And in that quiet room, under the weight of his gaze, I understood that safety had a price, and I had just agreed to pay it. Julian stood in the center of the mansion's vast living room, his arms crossed, his expression composed but steely, and I knew in that instant that he had already formed a plan, careful, deliberate, to deal with Jason and every other threat that lingered in the shadows. "Emily," I told myself, this was both a relief and a warning. Safety under Julian Moretti came hand in hand with absolute control. His eyes found mine, and when he spoke, his voice was low, firm, and resonant with quiet power. "Emily," he said, "you don't have to live in fear anymore. I'll take care of everything. No one will ever touch you again." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and unease, aware that my every move was now part of a plan far larger than me, and that Julian alone would define the line between danger and safety. He walked toward the tall window, looking out at the cars waiting in the driveway, the guards stationed with disciplined precision, each man poised for action. The sight made one thing clear: Julian's words weren't just promises. They were part of a machine already in motion, a strategy executed with precision and foresight. He turned back, his gaze unwavering, and I felt the full weight of his attention, the sense that nothing from this point forward would escape his notice. Protection and surveillance had become indistinguishable. "Jason will pay for what he's done to you," Julian said, his tone even, measured, but laced with resolve. "But what I do isn't about revenge, it's about finality. I'll make sure there's no more danger. Ever." His voice filled the room, calm yet commanding, and though it steadied me, it also pressed against my chest like a quiet force I couldn't resist. I sat in silence, torn between fear and a deep, unsettling fascination. From this moment on, Jason's every move would be monitored, my every step guarded. I had entered a world of power and precision, where safety was built on control. Julian walked to the table, lifted a slim file, and opened it before me. Inside were photographs, notes, records Jason's movements, phone logs, addresses, all cataloged in meticulous detail. The sheer scope of it left me breathless. Julian had already mapped everything, as if he'd been planning this long before I'd spoken his name. "This is the plan," he said, his voice steady, clipped with authority. "Each step has been arranged to ensure your safety. Every threat will be neutralized. You won't need to act. You won't even need to worry." I felt the tension ease slightly in my chest, replaced by the heavy realization that this protection came with a cost, the surrender of freedom itself. From now on, I would live inside the world Julian controlled, where danger couldn't reach me, but neither could independence. When Julian turned back toward me, his eyes softened just enough to blur the edge of his authority. He placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, firm but not forceful, a gesture that carried both reassurance and command. "You're safe now," he said quietly, "but remember, safety has its price. In my world, power and protection are one and the same." His words sank deep, steady, and final. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. Every threat from this moment on would be dealt with not by me, but by him, on his terms. And as his hand lingered, I realized I had stepped fully into Julian Moretti's domain, where security came with invisible boundaries, where power was both a shield and a chain. It was the safest I had ever been, and the least free I had ever felt. Sitting in the spacious room, I could feel Julian's presence near me, calm, steady, quietly commanding. His eyes, though sharp, had softened, and the way his hand rested lightly on the table seemed both protective and deliberate, a silent balance between care and control. In that stillness, a realization came over me. My fear of him, the dread I'd carried since the first night at La Tavola, might not have told the whole story. "Emily," I told myself, "maybe he isn't as dangerous as I imagined. Maybe what I'm seeing now is power restrained by intention, not cruelty." Julian smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't demand a reaction but lingered, gentle and confident. His voice was deep, unhurried. "You should eat something," he said, and there was no command in it, only concern, quiet and genuine. That simple tone, devoid of force, caught me off guard. My chest tightened, my thoughts tangled between relief and unease. The same man whose name had carried whispers of danger now sat across from me with an ease that felt human. Safe, even. He wasn't the distant figure I'd seen that night under the restaurant's chandelier, the untouchable boss whose gaze silenced a room. Here, in his world, he was something different, still powerful, still impossible to read, but also strangely kind. I realized, to my own confusion, that Julian's authority didn't only command, it also shielded. His power wasn't always about dominance. Sometimes it was about protection, about keeping chaos at bay with quiet precision. And that contradiction unsettled me. When he walked toward the window, his movements measured and sure, I watched the way he paused to observe the guards outside, the detail in his gaze, the way he seemed to see everything and everyone. Then he turned back to me, his tone low but certain. "No one will touch you again, Emily. Not while I'm here." The words wrapped around me like warmth against cold air. For the first time in years, I felt what it meant to be unafraid to exist without the instinct to flinch, without calculating every exit. "Emily," I whispered inwardly. Maybe it isn't his power that frightens me anymore, it's what that power means when it's used for me. I looked at him, and something shifted quietly inside me, a mix of relief, curiosity, and caution. He was no longer just a man who held control over a city, but someone whose control might now include me, in ways I hadn't expected. And yet, instead of fear, there was something else taking shape: trust. hesitant but growing. I realized then that my feelings toward Julian would no longer be simple. They would blur between gratitude and wariness, fascination and restraint. I would have to learn to trust him slowly, carefully, knowing that the safety he offered came intertwined with the same power that could confine me. It was both foreign and magnetic the way danger and comfort coexisted in him, and as I watched the faint reflection of his figure against the window, I knew that whatever came next would test not just my boundaries, but my heart's fragile instinct to believe again. I watched the evening at the restaurant quiet down, warm amber lights reflecting on the tabletops, when the atmosphere snapped taut as a familiar silhouette appeared at the entrance. Jason, the man who had haunted my life with fear for so many years, stepping in with a threatening face and eyes burning with anger. My heart slammed. Old terrors rose like a tide when I saw him stride confidently through the dining room, sowing chaos with loud, aggressive words that made patrons turn, staff flinch, and me feel as if I had been thrown back into the dark memories I had tried so hard to bury. He moved from table to table demanding to see me, his voice sharp and menacing, and I felt the walls of safety I had built around myself tremble. I stepped back, my pulse racing, and instinctively looked for refuge, certain that Julian would not let me face this alone. Before panic could fully take me, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps cut through the room, and Julian appeared in the doorway, entering with a calm that carried weight, his gaze sweeping the room and stopping on Jason, and the air changed immediately. Customers and staff alike felt the power radiating from him. No one dared move or speak. All watched in silence, and I felt my chest ease a little, the tension both quelled and heightened by Julian's presence. Jason turned, and his eyes found Julian, recognizing at once the authority and force the man carried. Yet he tried to keep his posture proud and threatening. The difference in power and influence, however, was unmistakable. Julian walked toward him, his voice low and sharp, every word a warning and a declaration of power. "Cease this behavior and leave now. Anyone who harms Emily will pay." He did not need to shout or strike. His presence alone made Jason falter, and I realized then that Julian's power did not rest solely on violence but on control, on a piercing gaze and absolute confidence. I stood close by, a mix of fear and relief, watching as in that instant, every threat I had once dreaded felt contained. The protection I felt was tinged with the weight of the power behind it, and I could not look away. The restaurant slowly returned to a hush. Jason stepped back, his eyes still defiant but stripped of the overwhelming control they had once held, and I understood with a strange, heavy clarity that from now on Julian's presence meant not only protection, but a visible reminder. Anyone who dared threaten me would face the full force of the power he controlled, a truth that settled my heart, yet pressed on me the responsibility of entering a world I had not chosen, where safety and authority walked together, and my life had already been changed. Jason was finally led by Julian into a private room at the back of the restaurant, where the golden light illuminated every fine detail, soft but revealing. Julian guided me to stand quietly in one corner, close enough to see everything, and my pulse pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Fear and curiosity intertwined inside me. I felt both protected and tense, every nerve alive under the weight of what was about to unfold. Julian stood across from Jason, his posture controlled, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice calm but resonant with command. "Jason," he said, his tone low and precise, "you thought you could do whatever you pleased with Emily, but I've been aware of your actions for a long time." Dowls. Jason tried to maintain his bravado, but the flicker of fear in his eyes betrayed him. The air itself seemed to thicken as Julian's presence filled the room, a power that didn't need to be shouted to be understood. I pressed back against the wall, my heart thundering as I watched Julian take control of the situation, without raising a hand, his restraint more intimidating than violence could ever be. He moved closer, each step deliberate, each word an assertion of dominance. "You followed her, threatened her, believed you could own her. But from this moment on, that ends. You'll leave this place and you won't come back." Jason's jaw tightened, a glint of defiance flickering through his fear, but Julian merely looked at him, a brief, cutting glance that silenced him instantly. The imbalance of power was complete. I could almost feel it in the air, the way Julian's calm command dismantled Jason's aggression piece by piece. My fear began to ease, replaced by an uneasy awe. Julian's authority wasn't loud. It was psychological, precise, absolute. He stepped closer again, his voice quieter now but heavy with meaning. "Remember this, Jason. I know every detail, every step you take. I don't need to threaten, and I don't need to use force. My presence alone is enough." Jason's composure cracked. He faltered, his fear visible now, and I realized that Julian's power came not from anger but from control, from a stillness that carried its own gravity. I watched him in silence, struck by the contrast, the same man who once terrified me now standing as my shield, his authority both reassuring and overwhelming. When he turned toward me, his eyes softened just slightly. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, a gesture that carried warmth and warning in equal measure. It said, "You're safe, but understand the cost of that safety." In the tense silence that followed, Jason lowered his head, defeated. Julian took a step back, his voice low but unyielding. "Leave. If you ever return or harm her again, the consequences won't be a warning." Jason didn't reply. He turned and left the room without another word, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. I exhaled shakily, the room suddenly feeling larger, lighter. Relief washed over me, but so did a strange heaviness. Julian's dominance had erased the threat, yet the weight of his control remained in the air, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. When the door finally closed, Julian turned back to me. His eyes, soft yet razor-sharp, met mine as he placed his hand gently over mine, his voice quiet but firm. "You're safe now," he said. "But remember, safety and power will always walk together." Directions down in it. In that moment, I understood. I was protected inside a world Julian commanded completely, a world where every danger was extinguished before it could reach me, but where every heartbeat, every breath, also moved beneath the shadow of his control. And though fear no longer ruled me, something else had taken its place, a strange, compelling tension that made me feel both secure and breathless, standing in the gravity of a man whose power defined the air itself. When the door closed behind Jason, I stood motionless, my heartbeat still uneven, my hands trembling as I wrapped my arms around myself. Relief and tension mingled inside me, surging through every nerve. Julian moved toward the table, his steps unhurried, deliberate. From his jacket, he drew a cream-colored envelope and lifted it into the light, his eyes never leaving my face. The sight made my breath hitch. It was the letter, the one Jason had used to trap and torment me for years, the symbol of my helplessness now resting in Julian's hands. "Emily," I told myself, as memories flooded in the sleepless nights, the quiet terror of every monthly payment, the guilt that gnawed at me long after I'd escaped. Yet beneath that wave of memory, warmth flickered. For the first time, I saw the truth laid bare. The letter was no longer in the hands of the man who had controlled me. Julian had it, and that changed everything. He opened the envelope carefully, his expression calm, both gentle and commanding. "You don't have to be afraid of this anymore," he said quietly, his voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome. His gaze met mine, unwavering, and I felt something shift inside me, fear folding into a fragile form of trust. The absolute power that once terrified me now felt, impossibly, like the very thing keeping me safe. My breathing slowed, syncing with the steady rhythm of his. The air felt thick between us, part liberation, part constraint, as if safety itself came with its own invisible chains. Julian folded the letter neatly, placed it inside a small black safe beside the table, and locked it with a soft click. His eyes stayed on me, steady, unrelenting, and I knew in that instant that my past had finally lost its grip. No one could use it to hurt me again. But even as relief washed through me, I couldn't ignore the weight of what it meant that my freedom now lived inside his control. The safety I felt was inseparable from the authority that surrounded him, from the choices he made on my behalf. It was both a gift and a surrender. Julian stepped closer, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, the touch warm but firm. "It's over," he said softly. "No one will ever use this against you again. I'll make sure of it." His tone held both reassurance and warning, a reminder that protection and power would always move together in his world. I looked at him, meeting the steady calm in his eyes, and something deeper stirred, a cautious trust, born from fear but growing stronger with every breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by Jason's threats, but by the strange truth that my safety now belonged to someone else. In that moment, I understood the balance I would have to learn, to live within the boundaries of Julian's control while finding my own sense of peace within it. The fear that once defined me had given way to something far more complex, a hesitant faith, fragile but real. And as he stood there, holding the letter that had once held me captive, I realized that Julian now held both my freedom and my fate, and that, despite the lingering fear, a part of me had already begun to trust him. As I stepped into Julian's mansion, each footfall echoed softly against the cool marble floor, and in that quiet rhythm, I felt the weight of the contrast between this place and the cramped apartment I had called home for years. Warm, golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers, glinting off smooth painted walls and polished brass, turning everything around me into something magnificent and foreign. Emily, I told myself, my thoughts racing with awe and unease. My pulse quickened as I realized I was standing inside the world I had only ever glimpsed from behind the restaurant's glass windows, a world built on wealth, control, and unshakable power. Julian walked beside me, his presence steady and composed. His hand rested lightly on my back, a gesture that felt both guiding and possessive, gentle and watchful. I could sense it even without looking. Every move I made was already within his awareness. My eyes drifted across the room, the oil paintings, the Persian rugs, the furniture carved from rich wood, and I felt small, almost fragile. Everything in this place spoke of permanence and precision, as though nothing here existed without purpose or control. Julian stopped before a tall window that overlooked a perfectly kept garden. The faint scent of rain drifted in from outside, and I watched the way his reflection merged with the soft glow of the lights. There was an unshakable calm in his posture, the kind that could both comfort and intimidate. That composure, it wasn't just discipline, it was authority, the kind of power that could shield or suffocate depending on how it was used. And for the first time, I began to understand that the very control I had once feared might also be the thing keeping me safe. I sank into the corner of a plush sofa, the fabric cool and smooth beneath my fingers. The softness startled me. It was almost too indulgent, too foreign to belong to me. "Emily," I whispered inwardly, "you've never felt anything like this before." The strangeness of luxury mingled with the quiet awareness that I was being protected by a man who embodied power, yet spoke with a gentleness that could unravel all my defenses. Julian took the seat across from me, his gaze never breaking. "Emily," he said, his voice low and measured, "this will be your home for now. It's safe. No one can reach you here." His words carried a certainty that left no room for doubt. I nodded slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing only a little. The relief of knowing I was no longer alone pressed against the quiet pressure of realizing what that safety cost. In this world, protection and control were bound together, inseparable. I looked around again, at the reinforced windows, the subtle hum of the security system, the still air that seemed to listen. Every detail reflected Julian's reach, his power rendered visible in the quiet perfection of the room. I understood then that the safety I had been given demanded trust, and trust meant surrendering pieces of freedom I wasn't sure I could afford to lose. Julian rose, his steps slow, deliberate, as he circled the room, adjusting small things with the precision of a man who left nothing to chance. When he returned, he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to worry anymore, Emily," he said softly. "But understand, everything here is controlled for your protection." A breath escaped me, part relief, part resignation. The contrast between my old life and this one pressed heavily on my chest. Freedom once came with danger, while safety now arrived hand in hand with control. The two were intertwined, impossible to separate. I sat down again, my hands trembling in my lap, feeling both sheltered and cautious, comforted yet uncertain. The mansion was quiet around me, vast and still, and I realized that from this moment on, this would be my world, a world of elegance and quiet pressure, where I would learn to trust, to adapt, and to live beneath the delicate weight of Julian's protection. It was strange, intoxicatingly safe, and utterly unlike anything I had ever known. I sat on the edge of the sofa in the vast living room, my arms folded lightly around myself, feeling that strange blend of relief and tension that always came when Julian stood near. He faced me, his presence steady, eyes softened but still carrying that piercing clarity that never missed a single detail. His voice, low and calm, wove through the air like velvet and steel all at once. "Emily," he said, "you've carried fear and pressure for far too long. I need you to understand. Your safety will now be entirely within my control. That doesn't mean I'll take your choices away, but I will protect you, no matter what." His words landed with both comfort and gravity. I exhaled slowly, feeling sheltered yet restrained, realizing that Julian's authority wasn't only built on wealth or power, it was in the way he moved, the quiet assurance in his tone, the discipline behind every gesture. Everything about him, his stillness, his gaze, his restraint radiated control so refined it felt almost invisible until you were already inside it. Emily, I told myself, this isn't fear anymore, it's something else. Something that feels safe and overwhelming at the same time. Julian took a step closer, resting his hand lightly over mine. The warmth of his touch spread through me, both grounding and disorienting. His eyes searched my face as he spoke, voice gentle but firm. You've faced dangerous people, threats no one should ever endure, but that ends now. No one will harm you again. Your safety is my priority. Every decision I make from this point forward will be to ensure that. I looked up at him, caught between gratitude and caution, knowing that his protection came with a weight I could already feel pressing at the edges of my freedom. His care wasn't just kindness, it was structure, it was control. And yet, even knowing that, I didn't want to step away. Julian's gaze deepened, his tone soft but sharp enough to leave no doubt. There will be times when you'll feel pressure, perhaps even fear, but trust that everything I do is for your protection, not domination. Power, when used right, keeps chaos out. I will use mine precisely. Each word entered me like a pulse, warm, steady, but heavy. It was reassurance and command woven together, comfort wrapped in discipline. I could feel my heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of his voice, and somewhere deep inside, the fear that had once governed me began to loosen its hold. Still, beneath the calm, there was an undercurrent of awe, a reminder that safety in Julian's world always came hand in hand with surrender. He moved closer again, standing beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. You don't need to be afraid anymore, he said quietly, but understand power always carries responsibility. I'll protect you, but you'll also need to learn how to live in this world, where nothing is left to chance. I drew a shaky breath, my pulse quick but steadying, the dual sensation of safety and control tangling inside me like two inseparable truths. His presence was both shield and force, something I couldn't yet define but couldn't resist either. Emily, I whispered inwardly, you'll have to learn this, how to trust without losing yourself, how to live inside the calm that his power creates. And somehow, in that moment, I began to accept it, the invisible control that surrounded me, the safety that felt both seductive and unnerving. It was foreign yet familiar, a paradox I couldn't escape. Safety bound to power, protection intertwined with possession. I looked up at him, our eyes meeting in the warm stillness between words. Something inside me shifted, a fragile trust, hesitant but real, began to take root. For the first time, I didn't just feel protected, I felt seen. And as I sat there, the distance between fear and faith narrowing, I understood that I had already stepped into Julian's world, completely a world where protection, power, and control existed as one, and where, for now, I somehow belonged. Sitting by the tall window that overlooked the vast garden, bathed in the golden glow of warm light scattered among the trees, I closed my eyes for a moment and drew in a slow, steady breath. The air was still, perfumed faintly with rain and trimmed grass. Emily, I whispered inwardly, is this the freedom I've been searching for, or just another kind of captivity, wrapped in elegance and power? My heart still beat a little too fast as fragments of the past flickered through me, years spent trembling in fear, sleepless nights spent listening for footsteps outside my door, the constant dread that someone would come for me. And yet, the fear that once ruled every corner of my life now felt distant, replaced by something quieter, more complicated, a blend of safety and restraint, peace and unease. Julian stood nearby, silent, his gaze calm but unrelenting, as if to remind me that everything within my sight, every breath, every flicker of thought was known to him, anticipated by him. And in that realization came a strange truth. Perhaps the freedom I had once imagined untethered, unguarded, had never truly existed until someone powerful had decided to protect me. I looked around the room again, tracing the outlines of the life that now surrounded me. The soft shimmer of paintings framed in gold, the delicate hum of the security system pulsing somewhere beneath the walls, the invisible vigilance that turned luxury into safety. Every detail whispered that this calm wasn't born of chance. It was built, maintained, controlled. And if I wanted peace, if I wanted protection, I would have to learn how to exist inside this carefully constructed order. Emily, I told myself, freedom no longer means standing alone against the dark. Maybe it means allowing someone else, someone like Julian, to stand in the storm for me. The thought made my chest tighten, equal parts relief and confusion. The difference between my past and my present was like the difference between raw air and breath itself. One had left me fighting to survive. The other asked only that I surrender enough to be safe. Julian moved closer. His hand came to rest lightly on my shoulder, steady and sure. His touch carried warmth and quiet, authority gentle, but with the unmistakable weight of control. His eyes met mine, soft yet precise, and in that look, I felt an assurance so complete it bordered on command. The security he offered wasn't fragile or uncertain. It was deliberate, all-encompassing. It made me want to trust him and fear what that trust might cost. I closed my eyes again, letting the feeling wash over me. Safety, stillness, a kind of peace I'd never known. And I asked myself once more, is this freedom? Freedom not to run, not to hide, but to be protected, to exist within someone else's strength. It was a different kind of liberation, one defined not by escape but by surrender. The silence between us stretched, rich and heavy, until I understood something I hadn't before. I was ready to accept this world, the one Julian had built, the one where safety and power lived side by side. I didn't know if I could trust him completely yet, but I wanted to, because he had turned protection into strength, and strength into something that felt dangerously close to freedom. It was a freedom unfamiliar but magnetic, safe, demanding, and impossibly human. And for the first time, I believed that maybe this, right here in the quiet shadow of his control, was the kind of freedom I had never known how to ask for. The morning sunlight spilled gently through the trees as I stepped out of Julian's mansion, the air still cool and laced with the faint scent of rain. The city seemed softer than I remembered, almost reborn under the thin veil of mist that clung to the pavement. Emily, I told myself, you've lived here for years, but it's never looked this beautiful before. Maybe it was the way light danced against the wet streets, or maybe it was the strange mix of calm and power that still lingered in me from the world I had just stepped out of, the world Julian had built. He stood by the car at the curb, hands in his pockets, his gaze steady and composed. Emily, he said, his voice warm, but edged with quiet authority. You don't have to stay. If you want to go home, go anywhere, do anything, I won't stop you. The choice is yours. My breath caught for a moment. It was such a simple sentence, but it felt like a door opening inside me. For the first time in years, my decision was mine alone. Yet even in that freedom, I could still feel his power surrounding me, not as a cage, but as a shadow that promised protection and carried its own weight. I walked slowly down the driveway, my heartbeat steady but uneven, my steps cautious. The neighborhood unfolded like a familiar dream: coffee shops with fogged windows, the scent of bread from a corner bakery, the quiet rhythm of a city already awake. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. Because now, I understood, safety wasn't something that existed on its own. It was something created, guarded, maintained, and somewhere behind me, Julian was the one ensuring it. When I reached the street, I glanced back. He followed at a respectful distance, his presence calm but unmistakable, like gravity. He didn't speak, didn't intervene, didn't tell me where to go. But the awareness of him, of his quiet vigilance, was enough to remind me that even this freedom came wrapped in his watchful control. At the bus stop, I rested my hand on the cold metal railing, letting the city's hum settle into me. Commuters lined up, their faces drawn in morning focus. Students checked their phones. A breeze stirred the hem of my coat. Everything was ordinary, and yet I was seeing it through a new lens, one tinted by safety, by power, by the invisible thread that tied my steps to Julian's presence. He approached then, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Emily, he said softly, I want you to know wherever you go, whatever you choose, I'll make sure you're safe. The decision is yours, but my protection doesn't end. I exhaled, half relief, half tension. This, I realized, was the paradox of my new world. Freedom offered with one hand, guarded by the other. I sat on the bench, watching the buses roll past, their reflections rippling across puddles, and thought about how strange it felt to be both free and protected, to live inside a choice that came with invisible boundaries. When the bus finally stopped in front of me, Julian's hand brushed my back, not to guide, not to claim, but to reassure. I stepped up, turned once to look at him, and our eyes met. Gratitude, unease, and something deeper passed between us, an unspoken understanding that freedom and power could coexist, but never without cost. As the bus pulled away, the city opened before me broad and bright, alive and uncertain. I pressed my hand against the window, feeling the faint vibration of the engine, and whispered inwardly, "Maybe this is freedom." A freedom watched over, a freedom that breathes but never truly escapes. And for the first time, I didn't run from it. I accepted it, the strange, steady rhythm of a new kind of safety, and as the mansion faded into the distance, I knew I was stepping into the world again, not alone, but carried by the echo of Julian's promise. Protection without possession, freedom within his reach. I rested my hand against the bus window, watching the trees glide past in the soft morning light. The rhythm of the road, steady and low, seemed to hum in time with my thoughts. Every image from the last few days moved through my mind like scenes from a slow dream. The tense dinner at the restaurant, the first time Julian's eyes met mine, the chill of realizing I was being followed, the fear, the rescue, the warmth of safety that came after. It all unfolded now, a quiet cascade of moments both terrifying and miraculous, and I realized how much had changed in such a short time. "Emily," I told myself, "every step through fear, every decision to keep going, every moment of facing the power and protection that surrounded you, it has shaped you." What filled me now was not panic, but a strange calm, an understanding that freedom and control, safety and surrender, would always exist side by side in my life from the moment Julian appeared. The morning air flowed through the half-open window, cool and alive, brushing against my skin like a reminder that the world outside still belonged to me, even if differently than before. When the bus slowed near my familiar stop, I rose, clutching my bag, feeling the quick flutter of my heartbeat as my feet found balance again. The street outside looked unchanged, small shops opening for the day, a couple walking their dog, the same cracks in the pavement I'd once rushed over in fear. And yet, as I looked around, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was no longer running. For the first time in years, I was standing still and unafraid. The air felt lighter, the world broader, as if I had stepped into it anew. I descended the steps, my legs trembling slightly but holding firm. Each breath I took filled me with both nerves and quiet confidence. "Emily," I whispered inwardly, "you've grown through every test, every moment of panic, every trembling night. You've learned to survive, and now you're learning to live." When I turned back, I could almost see him, Julian, standing at a distance, somewhere behind the morning haze, calm and watchful. His eyes, always a mix of gentleness and command, seemed to find me even across the space between us. There was a faint smile on his lips, and though he said nothing, I could feel the silent weight of his presence, the quiet protection that never demanded but always existed. My chest ached with the strangeness of it, the way fear and trust, danger and comfort, could blend into something that felt almost like peace. I understood then that this journey had changed me in ways I hadn't known to expect. It wasn't just about learning to live under someone's protection, but about redefining what freedom meant. It wasn't the absence of power, but the ability to choose who to trust, when to stand alone, and when to let someone guard you while you found your strength again. Taking one more deep breath, I let my shoulders loosen, feeling the weight of the past slide away. Hope steady and unfamiliar rose quietly in its place. The city spread out before me, full of color, noise, and possibility. And I knew I was ready to walk into it, not as the frightened woman who once hid from the world, but as someone who had survived it, who could now choose when to yield, when to stand tall, and when to believe. "Emily," I told myself one last time, "you are safe, you are free, and for the first time, both can exist together." The morning sun broke through the clouds, catching on the edge of the glass as the bus pulled away. I turned toward the street ahead, my heart steady, my steps sure. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was beginning again. I walked once more through the gates of the mansion, my heartbeat quickening with that strange blend of familiarity and unease. The afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting shifting gold across the stone path, and with every step I took, I could feel the quiet hum of anticipation, peace layered with something electric, something waiting. "Emily," I whispered inwardly. Every step forward feels lighter, but it still trembles. I knew that nothing would ever be the same after entering Julian's world again, and yet, this time, safety pulsed through the air like a steady rhythm, calm, sure, controlled. It felt as if he was already waiting, wrapped in that same unshakable composure, where power and protection moved together like two sides of the same breath. The doors opened, and there he was, Julian, tall, poised, his gaze both sharp and gentle. When he smiled, for the first time directly at me, something inside me unraveled. Warmth spread through me so fast it made me dizzy. My heart stuttered once, unsure whether to race or rest. That smile wasn't merely polite, it carried recognition, understanding, the quiet dominance I'd come to know, now softened by something unexpectedly human. It made me feel seen, shielded, and just a little overpowered all at once. Emily, I told myself, this is what it means to stand between trust and control. The air around us seemed to still, as I walked toward him, each step hesitant, but more certain than before. This wasn't just a return, it was a choice. A silent declaration that I trusted the protection, even if I still feared the power behind it. Julian took a step forward, his gaze unwavering, voice low and steady. "Welcome back, Emily," he said. "I'm glad to see you safe." I nodded, the breath I'd been holding finally escaping, and for a moment, the tension eased. There was no command in his tone, no weight of expectation, only that quiet strength that surrounded him like gravity itself. I realized that from now on, every decision, every feeling I allowed myself would live within this balance between freedom and the subtle presence of his watchful care. "Emily," I whispered again inside my mind, "that smile has changed everything." It wasn't just reassurance, it was the start of something unspoken, a shift in the air, the opening of a chapter I didn't yet have words for. The boundaries between power and tenderness blurred until they felt like one and the same. I stood there, angled slightly toward him, meeting his gaze. The silence between us carried its own weight, its own truth. And in that silence, I felt it, the undeniable connection taking root, something that made the idea of protection feel less like confinement and more like a place to breathe. I understood then that I was no longer the woman who trembled at every shadow. I was standing in the light of a new beginning, strange, secure, and alive, with Julian beside me, his first true smile etched into my memory like a promise. And as the last rays of sunlight spilled through the open door, I knew I was ready to step fully into the world that awaited one, where safety and power intertwined, and where, at last, I could stand unafraid. The next morning, I crossed the threshold of the mansion once more, my heartbeat fluttering in that familiar rhythm of awe and anticipation. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, spilling in soft golden patterns across the marble floor, dancing over the ornate walls and polished surfaces. The house seemed alive with quiet splendor, grand, serene, and impossibly still. "Emily," I whispered inwardly, "this is real now. From this moment on, this place, this world built by Julian would be my home, at least for a while." Julian stood by the entrance, his tall frame outlined against the morning light. His eyes, sharp yet warm, caught mine, and a faint smile touched his lips. When he extended a hand and offered me a silver key, gleaming in his palm, something within me shifted. The key was more than a simple object, it was a symbol of trust, of permission, of the invisible boundary between protection and control that I was choosing to step across. The cool metal trembled slightly in my fingers as I took it, my breath catching as I realized what it meant. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was part of this world now, a world where safety and power were indistinguishable. "Emily," I told myself, "you've been afraid for so long. Maybe this is what it feels like to belong somewhere." Yet even as pride and relief rose within me, I felt the weight of understanding settle in my chest. This new freedom came with responsibility, the kind that demanded I learn to live within a structure where every detail, every inch of space, was curated and guarded. As I stepped further inside, my footsteps echoed faintly against the marble floors. The sound carried through the vast halls like a rhythm both foreign and familiar, blending with the soft hum of the morning air. Julian followed a few steps behind, his presence calm but commanding. "Emily," he said, in that low, steady voice that always seemed to balance comfort and authority. "This will be your space now. You're free to move, to rest, to work. Just remember, everything here is designed to keep you safe." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling between us. His tone wasn't a warning, but a truth, a reminder that in this house, even safety was something structured, deliberate, and absolute. For the first time, I felt what it meant to live in a world where protection was a constant, invisible presence, one that both steadied and restrained me. I entered the room that would now be mine. The air inside carried the faint scent of cedar and fresh linen. My eyes swept across the space. A large bed draped in smooth cream-colored sheets, a wardrobe filled with neatly arranged clothes, a writing desk by the window, and the view beyond, a sprawling garden glowing softly in the sunlight. It was beautiful, elegant, controlled, every element in perfect balance, a reflection of the man who had built it. The sight filled me with quiet amazement and a strange unease, security bound to structure, comfort tied to discipline. Julian stood at the doorway, his gaze steady but softened by something unspoken. "This key," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "isn't just for the door, Emily. It's a symbol of trust. I want you to know that you can live here freely, without fear. But freedom, in this world, also means accepting the power that keeps it safe." I drew a deep breath, the air thick with a sense of beginning. My heart beat fast but steady as I placed the key gently on the desk, the silver glinting in the morning light. Then I turned toward Julian, meeting his eyes. There was warmth there, measured, patient, certain, and I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't alone. "Emily," I thought, "you're standing inside the life you once thought impossible." Safety wasn't the absence of danger anymore. It was the quiet strength of being seen, protected, and trusted within someone else's world. And as the sunlight spread across the room, illuminating the silver key like a promise, I felt something rare and unmistakable, a sense of home, strange, unfamiliar, but deeply, profoundly safe. A beginning, wrapped in calm and quiet power. I sat in the grand living room of the mansion, holding an old letter in my trembling hands, its weight carrying every fragment of fear and memory pressed into the fibers of the paper. Jason's handwriting, still etched dark against the yellowed page, was a haunting echo of the last 3 years, a reminder of pain, loss, and countless sleepless nights filled with dread. But now, standing before the flickering glow of the fireplace, I realized I no longer wanted to carry those ghosts with me. "Emily," I whispered to myself, drawing in a long, trembling breath as my heart pounded in my chest. The firelight shimmered across my eyes, and with my hand quivering yet certain, I lifted the letter higher, knowing that this was the moment I would release the past and make room for the safety, strength, and freedom Julian had given me. He stood beside me, his gaze calm yet piercing, saying nothing, merely watching, as if to remind me that the past no longer held power and that I had the choice to let it go. I dropped the letter into the fire, and a strange blend of sorrow and relief swept through me as the paper curled and darkened, the smoke rising in soft, spiraling ribbons. The sharp scent of burning paper filled the room, but instead of pain, it carried an odd sense of cleansing, as though each line of ink that turned to ash took with it every trace of fear, pressure, and grief that had once bound me. "Emily," I thought, watching the embers fade and crumble, "you are no longer trapped by the threats or shadows Jason left behind." Every burden, every anxiety, was now guarded and erased under Julian's protection, and for the first time, I had the right to live fully in a world where safety and power existed side by side. I inhaled deeply, feeling a rush of new energy surge through me, my heart racing yet light, understanding that this small act, burning a letter, was more than symbolic. It was liberation, a promise to myself that the past would no longer control me, that I could move forward unafraid. Julian's voice broke the silence, low and steady, his eyes still on me, warm yet resolute. "Emily, you did the right thing. You've let the past go. Now, you're free to live for the present and for what's ahead." I looked at him, gratitude and confusion colliding in my chest, and realized that in that single moment, I had truly stepped out of the shadows, bathed in the soft golden light of the fire, surrounded by the quiet strength of the mansion. I felt a peace unlike any I'd known before, a serenity threaded with power and freedom. For the first time in years, I could breathe fully, live wholly, and choose my own path, no longer a prisoner of fear but a woman reborn into the warmth of safety and control. Emily stood before the tall mirror in her private room, her gaze fixed on her own reflection, as she slowly realized that she was no longer the fragile, frightened woman once haunted by the past. She had crossed into a new chapter of life, one built on safety and protection, yet also bound by a quiet sense of responsibility and the subtle power she would have to learn to embrace. Every contour of her face, every trace of what she had endured, had become a testament to strength and growth, to the choices she had bravely made to protect herself. In that still moment, Emily understood that true freedom was not the absence of danger, but the ability to choose, to confront, and to rise above, to step out of the darkness and find the light that belonged to her alone. She drew in a deep breath, feeling both peace and renewed energy surge within her, recognizing that the protection and affection Julian had given her were never acts of possession, but an invitation, a chance to trust again, to discover that in life, we sometimes need another person to walk beside us, so we can uncover our own inner strength and find serenity. From the reflection staring back at her, Emily realized a simple truth. Every human being has the power to change their own life, to overcome fear, to endure hardship, and to choose a path aligned with their true worth. Courage, she now knew, was not only about facing danger, but about granting oneself the permission to decide, to live truthfully according to one's own choices. If you are watching this story, take a moment to reflect on Emily's journey and ask yourself, in your own life, have you dared to face your past, to trust again, and to give yourself the authority to live freely? Share this story with those around you, so together we can find inspiration and strength to rise above the challenges we face. We would love to hear what's in your heart. Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts, your emotions, and how this story connects to your own life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, and share, so you won't miss the heartfelt stories we bring every day. We hope each video gives you a sense of empathy, comfort, and meaningful lessons about life, just as Emily found her strength and freedom. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, we wish you good health, peace, and a gentle joy in every day. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to sharing more inspiring stories with you soon.